everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about the costumes on HBO's The Gilded Age, designed by, and I apologize in advance for absolutely butchering her name, Maimone. As of the time that I'm filming this video, there are currently 8 episodes released out of a 9-episode first season. But don't worry, The Gilded Age has already been renewed for a second season, which frankly is a relief to me since I don't want it to end. Are you watching The Gilded Age? I would love to hear your thoughts on the series and the costumes, so please do comment down below and let me know. I'm going to try to keep this pretty spoiler-free plot-wise for those of you who have not yet seen the series. There will of course be spoilers for costumes though, so if you want to be surprised by what people are wearing, then this is not the video for you. I found almost all of these images that you'll see in this video online, plus I've thrown in a few screen caps from the series. Primarily, these images have come from @GildedAgeHBO on Instagram, as well as the Instagram accounts of some of the actors in the series and of Eric Winterling, @eWinterling, who made many of the costumes for the series. There are also a handful from the Facebook group called HBO The Gilded Age fan page, and I want to especially thank @PeriodCorset and @cat_Stelzer over on Instagram for allowing me to use some of the terrific comparison images that they have both shared, comparing the costumes from the series to actual period images. I've linked all of these resources in the description below so that you can check them out for yourself. By the way, this video is going to entirely focus on the fashions worn by the female characters in the series, since I know nothing about menswear. But if you do want to go learn about the menswear in the Gilded Age, I have linked a great video by Vintage Birch down in the description as well. And with all of that said, let's go ahead and dive into the costumes. Right at the very beginning of this series, we are greeted with a year, 1882. So let's start off with a little look at what actual 1882 fashion would have looked like for the upper crust in New York society. In other words, fashion plates. 1882 is basically the end of the natural form era. In 1881, dresses were still rather tight-fitting to the legs, with a back that usually slopes down over the rear and a rather columnar look overall. While you can still see a little bit of this look hanging around in 1882, we're also seeing the bustle come back into favor. It is not yet the shelf-like bustle of the mid-1880s, but we are seeing the bustle grow larger literally as the year progresses. For example, take a look at these plates from Dare Bazaar and Ladies Bazaar. These several plates span December 1881 through December 1882, and right around July or so, you can start to see the bustle really taking shape. And by November and December, we have a small shelf-like bustle again. Just to show you a bit slower, here's December 1881, January 1882, March 1882, April 1882, June 1882, July 1882, August 1882, October 1882, November 1882, and December 1882. Isn't it so interesting to literally watch the bustle grow larger with each passing month? So what about the costumes in the actual show? Well, they're not exactly consistent. Now, the show never specifies when in 1882 it takes place, nor how much time passes within the course of this first season. However, we can pinpoint episode 7 with the lighting of the Times building, which actually occurred, though not quite as pictured in the episode, on September 4th, 1882. The confusing part, of course, is that in episode 8, we visit Newport, Rhode Island, and Carrie Astor remarks prior to that visit that she will be staying for the remainder of the season. Except, of course, that the season in Newport meant the summer, so it would actually have come before the event in episode 7. So I guess that despite fashion changing pretty distinctly as 1882 progressed, we're kind of going to have to throw any real timeline of that year out the window for the sake of the show. And frankly, I think that makes sense, since in every episode we see a real mixture of bustle styles anyway. Now, of course, fashion plates are really meant like the pages of Vogue, presenting a look that could be ordered to be made, but not one that exists yet. So In New York, even the uber-rich people that we see in the Gilded Age aren't going to match any precise month of the year anyway. And as we move down in society, such as to the servants of these grand houses, none of these women are going to have the finances to keep up with fashion like the people upstairs. In fact, ladies' maids were often given cast-off dresses by the lady that they served, if the lady was tired of wearing them or if fashion had changed significantly. So since we know that the women in this series aren't going to look exactly like fashion plates, let's take a look at what they actually are wearing. We're going to examine both what the costumer got right, such as many of the dresses that are quite obviously heavily inspired by extant dresses, fashion plates, and paintings, and also, of course, what they got wrong. And we're going to do this character by character, since I think for those of us who have watched the show, it's pretty obvious who nailed it and who missed the mark. Let's start with the Van Rhijn household and its matriarch, Agnes Van Rhijn. Christine Baranski is doing an absolutely fabulous job with such sharp dialogue and is so delightful to watch in every scene. She's my favorite character. She also happens to be beautifully dressed in very rich and deep jewel tone colors with lots and lots of texture, weight, and depth to her costumes. Her clothing is a great representation of old money, even though I would say it doesn't really adhere to any specific fashion years and is sort of an amalgamation of just most of the 1880s. Even still, nothing ever looks overtly wrong about any of her outfits, and they all help to add to the gravitas of her character. Her sister, Ada Brook, played by Cynthia Nixon, is usually dressed in warm tones of orange, yellow, and gold, and even when she does wear blues, she has orange, yellow, or golden tones incorporated into her outfit as a trim or a contrasting fabric. These warm tones help to show her as the more motherly and warmer personality of the two aunts. Ada also has a lot of outfits that are very heavily based on extant garments or photos from the period. To be honest, I think that part of the reason behind this may have been to make her look a little kooky, not to make her look more accurate. As anyone who has looked at a lot of the fashion plates of this era can tell you, there really were a lot of weird things going on with their dresses. But honestly, it is delightful to see those oddities brought to the screen. Likewise, in Cynthia Nixon's interview on the Gilded Age podcast, which I will link down below, she talks about her hairstyle and how she requested all of those curls be piled on top in order to make her look a little off, but really, she wound up absolutely nailing the popular curly-fronted hairstyle of the period. The dresses that I'm showing here are just a couple of Ada's outfits that are copied from actual period styles. She really is spot on. Now to their niece, Marian Brook, played by Louisa Jacobson. Marian is the first character that we come to who just looks a little wrong for the period. I'm sure that this was a design choice for a few different reasons, so it doesn't tend to bother me that much other than making her outfits pretty boring. For one, Marian is new to society and to New York, and probably does not have a background in dressing fashionably, considering her father's money troubles and her small-town origin. For two, the styles that Marian wears make her look young and naive, though they still look quite simple, which sets her apart from Gladys Russell, who I will get to in a little bit. They're fairly well tailored, but more so than anyone else, there is something in the fit that just doesn't quite work. I'm not positive if that fit issue was a design choice or not, and to be honest, it's hard for me to say exactly what all is making her fit look off. For one, she is wearing older styles than most of the other characters on this show, more natural form, where the skirts were not nearly as full as what we come to in 1882. So she was more like 1880 or so. But frankly, most of the time, it just looks like she's missing a petticoat. There's also something off about her bodices. I think that a lot of them look a little too long on her and too large in the bust, but I still haven't decided if that's what all it is that makes her look so off. Although she starts the series in mourning for her father, Agnes does not want Marian to remain in mourning, and she quickly starts to wear a lot of pastel colors, like blues and yellows, which, again, makes her look younger. She also wears a lot of jumper-style bodices with a blouse that has long fitted sleeves and a high collar underneath a separate sleeveless bodice. Although this was a very common practice in the late 1860s and very early 1870s, I don't feel like I've come across it much, if at all, in the 1880s. But again, I can see why they do it, since it makes her look both young and casual, and I suppose more relatable to a modern audience. After all, she is the character that we are supposed to relate to, since we're kind of seeing society in her eyes, as she is also new to this world. As the episodes progress and Marian starts to come into her own and make her own decisions, she does start to get some richer colors, such as deep blues, olive greens, and, my favorite, her gorgeous hot pink dress from episode 7. These later dresses do tend to also fit her better, which reinforces my belief that the weirder fitting dresses earlier on is likely a design choice. One thing that I want to touch on here, since we see it a lot with Marian, are all of those super obvious back-closing day bodices. Marian and Aurora Fane, who we'll get to in a little bit, are the worst offenders here. For those of you not familiar with the bustle era, day bodices always closed up the front, whereas evening bodices could close up either in the front or in the back. The front closures for day bodices could either be obvious, such as buttons right down the center, or more often they would be hidden. A particularly popular style in the 1880s was to have a ruched panel running up the center front of the bodice. In these cases, for example, there would be hidden hooks and eyes up the center front on an interior structure layer, and then these hooks and eyes would be covered over by additional hidden hooks and eyes where one side of the bodice overlapped the ruched panel. If you're curious about how these types of closures work, I will leave links to both my 1880s peppermint stripy bustle video and also an extant antique bodice video down below in the description. In any case, many of Marian and Aurora's dresses close up the back with hooks and eyes with a piece of boning on each side. I actually talked to Eric Winterling, who made many of these dresses, and asked if it was a design choice to do this, and he told me that A, they had to work through all of these dresses very quickly as they made them, and B, he was concerned that the wardrobe department would not know how to work with the more complicated closures of that era to get the ladies dressed on set. They also apparently didn't look quite as obvious in the workshop as they did on film. But it sounds like we might be seeing less of the back closures in the next season. Anyway, enough about Marian. Let's move on to Peggy Scott, played by Danae Benton. Peggy has a really lovely wardrobe. She wears rich, deep colors, which help to show the independence and determination of her character. Her silhouettes are pretty spot on for early 1882, with a very small bustle, but the skirts that are nicely filled out with the proper undergarments and petticoats, and all of her outfits feel both stylish and smart and practical. I also love the use of plaid in several of her dresses, as well as the use of asymmetry, since that was a very popular trend in the 1880s. I would say there are only two slightly questionable things out of all of Peggy's outfits, and they are the fit on this velvet jacket and this weird tie belt thing on this otherwise gorgeous ensemble. Other than that, Peggy is pretty darn flawless. And now let's move across the street to the Russell household and take a look at the interesting fashion choices of Bertha Russell, played by Carrie Coon. Bertha is new money, and we can pretty plainly see that the costume designer has chosen to dress her in a very different style than the rest of the women in this show. Bertha's clothing is honestly all over the map. Occasionally, we see her in something that is just about spot on, like the dress she wears in Newport in episode 8, which is pretty clearly inspired by this fashion plate. But most of the time, not so much. Bertha's costumes employ modern, often very shiny fabrics. I still think one of the worst offenders is the weird space age gown that we see her in the first episode. Her dresses have strange decorations like weird shoulder poops or an extreme use of feathers, and some of them have very strange or modern cuts like that first gown. In fact, even those of her dresses that don't tend purely towards the 20th or 21st centuries in cut tend to really be much more 1890s than 1880s. Likewise, another big issue with Bertha's dresses, though again, this is probably a character choice showing just how out of touch with fashion that she is is that she wears low-cut evening gowns almost all of the time, including just around the house in the middle of the day. She's a fan of very shiny silver, which appears in many of her outfits, and is something that I personally associate with futuristic looks. All of her looks blend together to really show how gaudy and out of place she is within New York society. In later episodes, though, after meeting Mr. McAllister, when she starts to get a little toehold into society, her costuming does evolve to better match what the other women are wearing, but almost always with a little something extra. It will be interesting to see if her clothing choices continue to evolve to meet actual fashion by the time we get to season 2. Of course, we also have to talk about the fashion worn by her daughter, Gladys Russell, played by Taissa Farmiga. Gladys is basically a China doll. She's old enough to be out in society, but she's forced to stay at home by her mother, so all of her costumes are designed to make her look even younger than she actually is. Many of Gladys's costumes are heavily inspired, I'd say a little too heavily inspired, by the 18th century. This 18th century inspiration was actually very trendy, particularly in the 1870s, but a couple of Gladys's costumes start to look like costumey 18th century dresses instead of 19th century dresses inspired by the 18th century. Luckily, we do lose a lot of that after the first few episodes, and we start to delve a little more deeply into those China doll fashions. I do wish that her hair was worn up as befitting her age, but having it down does make her look even younger, so I do understand the choice. Everything she wears is just frothy, lacy, florals, light colors, etc. I appreciate, though, that she has at least a few costumes that are heavily inspired by actual dresses of the period. This dress that she wears in Newport very much reminded me of this dress that you see a lot of in Tissot paintings. And her sailor look is a copy of one worn by Alexandra of Denmark, which I absolutely adore this dress, so I was super happy to see it on screen. And this outfit is a copy of the one in this painting by Conrad Kiesel. It's really fun to see all of these things that you're so familiar with from print appear on screen. I do also want to talk about some of the supporting characters of the show because I feel like each character really has a distinctive fashion sense, which is super nice to see from a design standpoint. Up first is Aurora Fane, played by Kelly O'Hara. Aurora tends to come off very sweet and feminine, which is furthered by her light and delicate wardrobe. She wears a lot of pale colors, often tending towards light silvery blues and greens, and decorated with a lot of lace. She's often shown with lower necklines, which were pretty much always reserved for dinner bodices, actually, though sometimes these open necklines that she wears are filled in with lace as well. I think her costumes do well to look expensive, but none of them really outshine any of the leading ladies of the show. Next up is Carrie Astor, played by Amy Forsyth. We haven't seen a lot of Mrs. Astor in this show yet, and though Mrs. Astor is really the woman who controls the New York society scene, Carrie, her daughter, serves as a much more approachable member of that family. I think this is especially because Carrie's costumes tread that line really well between China doll, with lots of delicate little lacy details, and fashionable young woman. And honestly, her clothing is very fashionable, and we even see her in a take on a fashion plate from the 1880s, though the plate is actually from 1886 or 87. Of course, we see many other gorgeously dressed people in this series as well. Mamie Fish has a real stunner in episode 8, though it does look rather late 1870s. Likewise, before she goes into mourning, Anne Morris wears this gorgeous gown, which again is quite 1870s. Dorothy Scott, Peggy's mother, has a couple of lovely understated costumes, and on the other hand, Mrs. Chamberlain takes the new money route and has some rather oddly embellished ensembles, like this one covered in weird 3D feathers. Lastly, I do want to take a very quick peek at a couple of the ensembles worn by the servants of the show when they're not on duty, since that gives us a clue as to what members of a lower class would have worn. First, Turner wears this lovely burgundy ensemble when out walking with Oscar Van Rhijn. The shape of the skirt and the asymmetrical bodice closure are perfect for the era, and other than the plainer fabric of the dress, she honestly looks quite fashionable. Bridget, on the other hand, wears a somewhat dumpy printed cotton dress in a very similar color to Turner's, It does not fit her well, and she has an oddly deflated bustle poof, but it does seem to be a pretty practical dress that a kitchen maid might wear on her night off. So overall, what do you think of the costumes in the show? Personally, I am really enjoying it, both the show and the costumes. One of the things that I had been thinking, prior to episode 8 at least, where there were definitely some questionable costume choices made, was that as the series had been progressing, the costumes as a whole have been vastly improving. What's weird about that was that the series was not at all shot in order. Thaisa Farmiga said in episode 6 of the official Gilded Age podcast, which I will link below, that the episodes were shot so out of order that she might exit a door in one room and not enter into the next room in that same scene until 5 months later. So it makes absolutely no sense that the costumes were somehow improving from one episode to the next. But frankly, although I do find myself to still be distracted by the back closures in many day dresses, I can forgive the many awful costumes of Mrs. Russell as a choice, and really appreciate the rest of the mostly beautiful costumes. I'm sad that there's only one more episode this season, and that we'll have to wait till who knows how long to be able to watch another episode. This is definitely an enjoyable show to watch. And hopefully this was an enjoyable video to watch too. Again, please do let me know your thoughts on this series so far. And if you liked this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube twice a week, with my sewing vlogs out on Tuesdays and other costuming content like this out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's @LadyRebeccaFashions. And in fact, I have been running an Instagram challenge all about Victorian fashions over there this month called #VictorianMarch, and I'd love for you all to participate. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Sharon, Julie, and Mirage. Thank you again so much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!